The dinner I never served. My mother-in-law, without warning, announced in the family WhatsApp group that she was bringing 16 relatives to have dinner at my house. My husband, Ethan, even added that I should not worry, that he would make sure I did not get overwhelmed. The moment he left to pick them up, I took advantage of it, boarded a flight to Charleston, South Carolina, to my parents' house, and left him completely stunned. My mother-in-law Margaret's voice message echoed through the family group while I was still sitting in front of my laptop, finishing a communications plan for a client. Family, listen up. Tomorrow night we're all having dinner at Ethan's place. His apartment is big, cool, and right in downtown Chicago. I've already thought it all through. It's the weekend. Perfect. The uncles, cousins, and kids can all get together and have a good time. I counted it out, and between adults and children, there'll be 16 of us. Claire, sweetheart, go to the grocery store early and prepare something decent, all right? When you have the means, you should show it. Immediately after that, my husband Ethan sent a quick message. Don't worry, Mom. There's plenty of space at home, and Claire cooks wonderfully. She'll take care of everything. It'll be perfect. I stared at the phone screen. My fingers rested over the keyboard for so long that the chat window dimmed and lit up again. In the end, I did not reply. I muted the family group notifications and got up to step out onto the balcony. Our apartment was in Lincoln Park, Chicago, on the 8th floor of a nearly 2,100 square foot building, a place into which I had invested almost all of my savings to build our home after we got married. 3 years ago, I married Ethan. My family is from Charleston. My parents work in publishing and have always had a stable income. I am their only child. Ethan's family is from a small town in Kentucky. It is a large family. He has an older sister, a younger sister, and a younger brother. When we got married, my parents contributed most of the money to buy the apartment. Ethan's family contributed a symbolic $20,000, and the monthly mortgage is paid mostly by me. Ethan handles the regular expenses, bills, gas, and some daily costs. But in the end, the major investment in this home was made by me. I used to think that did not matter. As long as Ethan was a good husband and we had a peaceful marriage, it meant I had chosen well and that we should build our future together. What I never imagined was that the price of building together would be allowing his entire family to enter my life without any filter, tearing down every boundary and treating it as the most normal thing in the world. During the first year after the wedding, my mother-in-law stayed with us for almost 3 months under the excuse of taking care of her new daughter-in-law. Those 3 months were when I understood what it meant to live in my own house without owning a single corner of it. She gathered all my skincare products and piled them into a box, saying those chemical creams only ruined a woman's face. She criticized my perfume, saying it smelled too fancy and made her dizzy, then replaced it with a lavender body spray so strong it gave me headaches. My clothes, the elegant outfits I wore to work, she called indecent and provocative, and without asking me, she packed a whole bag of them to send to her nieces back in Kentucky. I protested, confused and hurt. But every time I did, Ethan's reaction was always the same. Come on, honey. My mom is from a small town. She isn't used to Chicago life. She's only worried about you. Can you put up with it a little? Don't make a drama out of these little things. At first, his words made me think he was in a difficult position, trapped in the middle. Over time, I understood that he was not in a difficult position at all. He was simply used to prioritizing his family's comfort at the expense of my patience. I gave in once, then again, and then countless more times, until sometimes, standing in the middle of my own home, I felt more like a tenant than the owner. In the second year, my husband's family began making a habit of stopping by our place whenever they came to Chicago. At first it was to stay 1 night, then it became 2, and then it turned into dinners for which I had to leave work early, to buy groceries, cook, serve, and clean. Each time, Ethan spoke about it with shocking lightness. They're family, babe. What's the big deal? The apartment is big. They like you, that's why they enjoy coming. Like me, I did not know where that supposed affection was. Was it in letting the children jump with their shoes on the cream-colored sofa I had just bought? Was it in the dirty dishes left all over the dining table after dinner while they went into the living room and turned the TV up loud? Or was it in my mother-in-law eating the fruit I had bought while complaining it was expensive and bland, not as good as the peaches from her hometown? Once, I stayed awake until 1 in the morning cleaning the kitchen, washing the tablecloth, taking out the trash, and putting back every cushion the children had thrown everywhere. Ethan passed by me yawning. Why are you trying so hard? You can do that tomorrow. I looked at him and smiled bitterly. Tomorrow, who's going to do it? He stood there for a moment, not knowing what to say, then answered, "Well, you can get it done in a minute." That sentence left me silent all night. In a minute, 2 words so light, yet they contained all my sweat, my frustration, and the feeling of being treated like a maid. From then on, I began speaking less, not because I had nothing to say, but because I began to understand. In this marriage, every time I expressed discomfort, I did not receive understanding. I received a lecture on generosity. Meanwhile, my husband's family grew more and more comfortable, entering my home as if it were theirs. They opened the fridge, chose bedrooms, requested specific dishes, and even decided how I should receive them. And tonight, that message in the family WhatsApp group was the peak of that shameless familiarity. My mother-in-law did not ask, she informed. Ethan did not consult me. He accepted on my behalf. 16 people, 1 dinner in the very apartment for which I had paid most of the money, where I had personally chosen every piece of furniture, every lamp, every curtain, and every plate. I returned to the living room. Through the floor-to-ceiling window, the city glowed like a carpet of blinking lights. Inside, the house was silent, tidy, filled with the sandalwood essential oil scent I loved. I walked slowly through every corner, feeling a mixture of pain and coldness. For 3 years I had yielded too much. I had surrendered my voice, my privacy, even my right to be tired in my own house. The phone vibrated. It was a private message from Ethan. "Honey, Mom just wants everyone to have a nice time. Besides, it's been a long time since the siblings all got together. Please help me with this. Just this once. I promise I'll help you with everything. I won't let you get tired." I read that sentence again and again. I could even imagine his face while typing it, surely with that confident expression, thinking his words were kind and considerate. But strangely, this time I no longer felt sorry. I only felt like laughing. Help me with everything, like all the other times. Like when he carried 2 plates to the table and considered his part done. Like when after dinner he sat with his relatives drinking while I stayed behind cleaning the battlefield until dawn. I placed the phone on the table. A feeling that had been growing inside me for 3 years found the perfect wind and became a bright flame. For the first time, I did not think about enduring. I thought about leaving. Not as a threat, not out of a temporary rage, but leaving at the exact right moment so that those who had always considered my sacrifice an obligation could taste for themselves the feeling of standing before a banquet with nobody in the kitchen. I opened my phone, calmly checked the weekend schedule, entered a travel app, searched for flights, and booked a hotel. When the confirmation appeared on the screen, a faint smile formed on my lips. Tomorrow night, the dinner would still happen. But the cook, the waitress, the woman swallowing bitterness as always, would no longer be me. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual, not because I had urgent work, but because my mind already had a plan so clear it felt almost chilling. I moved through the house like any other day. I made coffee, opened the curtains, watered the small pots on the balcony. Everything was so calm that even I was surprised. Maybe when a person has endured too much, by the time they finally let go, there are no storms left in the soul, only an almost cruel clarity. Ethan came out of the bedroom buttoning his shirt and asked, "You're up early?" "Yes, I couldn't sleep," I answered without looking at him. He sat in the chair across from me with a relaxed air, as if the conversation from the night before had created no tension at all. "Tonight I'll leave work early. I'll stop by the grocery store to pick up a few things. You try to come home early so we can start preparing." "Preparing what exactly?" I took a sip of coffee and raised my eyes to look directly into his. Ethan looked confused. "The dinner. Mom said it in the group and I accepted." My question visibly hardened his expression. "Claire, please don't start again. It's just dinner." "Just dinner," I repeated slowly. How easy it sounds when you say it. Ethan began losing patience. "Here we go again. Are you going to calculate everything? It's family. They're coming to have a good time, and you turn it into drama." I laughed. My laugh must have irritated him because he frowned immediately. I put down my coffee cup. "Your family is coming to visit. Why do I have to be the one serving them?" "Because you're my wife. And because I'm your wife, I have to cook for 16 people. Clean what 16 people dirty. Tolerate your nephews staining my house. Listen to your mother's orders. And at the end, smile and thank them for coming?" Ethan pressed his lips together. "Don't speak so harshly." "Where am I wrong?" He stood abruptly, dragging the chair with a sharp screech across the marble floor. You always take things to the extreme. My mother is older. She just wants to see the family together. What's wrong with that? Besides, our home is large. We're better off than others. What's the problem with helping family a little? I also stood, but unlike him, my voice was very low. Helping is when they ask you, when they respect you, when there are limits. Last night in the group, your mother announced it like an order, and you accepted for me as if I were the employee of this house. From beginning to end, you never asked whether I was tired, whether I wanted to do it, whether I felt like it. Ethan looked at me with a mixture of annoyance and incomprehension. Maybe he truly did not understand. Or maybe he understood perfectly, but had become so used to taking my sacrifice for granted that he did not want to think another way. He lowered his voice, using his usual conciliatory tone. Honey, I know it's stressful, but can't you do it for me just this once? Just this once. I was sick of hearing it. For 3 years, it had always been just this once. Endure one more time. Make an effort one more time. For me, one more time. Be generous one more time. And all those times had added up to create a marriage in which I was always the one expected to give in. I stared at him for a long while and then asked, Ethan, do you remember when your sister Rachel brought her 2 kids and they used my markers to draw all over the living room wall? He froze. They were kids. Do you remember the time your younger brother brought his friends over to drink here and one of them threw up on the rug? And the next morning I had to get on my knees to clean it? I didn't want that to happen. And do you remember when your mother opened my closet, took a new dress I had just bought, said that kind of clothing wasn't decent, and gave it to a cousin back in Kentucky? Ethan fell silent. I took a step closer, pronouncing every word clearly. Do you remember all of it? Or do you simply choose to pretend you forgot? The air in the room froze. Ethan turned his face away, jaw tight. A moment later, he said the sentence that made my heart grow even colder. Fine. If you think this house is yours, if you think that because you put in more money you have more rights, then I have nothing else to say. I looked at him. After everything he had heard, what reached him was not my pain, not my exhaustion, not the cry for help I had suppressed for years. The only thing he heard was the wounded ego of a man. I nodded. Correct. If you have nothing else to say, that's better. I don't want to keep talking either. I turned and went into the bedroom. Behind me, Ethan shouted, Claire! But I did not stop. I opened the closet and took down the small cream-colored suitcase from the top shelf. I had bought it for our short weekend trips. Since we married, I had barely used it for that purpose. Every vacation of mine was postponed because of work or interrupted by his family's improvised plans. Ethan entered the room, and when he saw the suitcase in my hand, his voice tightened. What are you doing? I bent down and began putting in a few simple pieces of clothing. Preparing. Preparing for what? In case tonight your family is too much for me. He rushed forward and grabbed the handle of the suitcase. Don't be ridiculous. I looked up. I'm not being ridiculous. For once, I'm thinking about myself. Ethan stared at me as if the person in front of him were a total stranger. And it made sense. For 3 years he had only known the Claire who endured, swallowed anger, and cleaned up the mess his family left behind. He had never known the Claire who dared to look him in the eye and say no. In the living room, my phone vibrated non-stop. Without needing to look, I knew it was my mother-in-law continuing her messages in the group, probably adding one dish, removing another, or specifying what kind of fruit, soda, or wine to buy. Suddenly, it seemed almost comical. They had not even arrived yet and had already turned my apartment into their private banquet hall, and I, the owner of the house, had been reduced to the role of unpaid servant. I zipped the suitcase shut. The sound, though soft, echoed in the quiet room like the first period at the end of a long sentence. I did not leave the house that morning. I dressed for work, put on a little lipstick, and grabbed my bag as if it were any other day. The only difference was that before walking out the door, I turned around to look at my apartment a little longer. Morning light entered sideways through the linen curtains, illuminating the beige fabric sofa whose upholstery had taken me a month to choose. The walnut dining table shone beneath the ceiling light. The bookshelf along the wall remained as neat as I had left it. Every object in that house carried my imprint. Every little corner was the result of my effort, my taste, and the times I had saved money to complete it. And yet, in only a few hours, a crowd would invade it, step on it, disorder it, criticize it, and of course assume they had every right to do so. Ethan stood at the door, his voice colder than his expression. You'd better come home early tonight. I turned to look at him. And if I don't? His eyes darkened. Try me. I did not answer. I stepped straight into the elevator. As the metal doors closed, Ethan's face disappeared behind the narrow slit, but his words kept echoing in my head. And if I did not come back? In the past, all it took was for him to frown or lower his voice like that for me to feel guilty. I would have softened, telling myself it was not worth making a scene. But that morning, remembering his eyes, I saw something with total clarity. He had never been worried that I was sad. He was only worried that I would stop being obedient. All day, I could barely focus on work. Not because I was nervous, but because my mind was too clear. I opened the presentation, corrected every line, sent every email, but in my head I was planning my departure step by step. I was not going to fight. I was not going to argue in front of everyone, and I would definitely not stay there listening to my mother-in-law give orders while I worked myself into exhaustion. As always, I was going to let them eat the consequences of what they had cooked together. At noon, the phone would not stop vibrating. I opened the family group. My mother-in-law had sent a long list of messages. Claire, remember to buy a good roast beef. Uncle Martin loves it. And don't forget proper homemade mac and cheese, none of that box stuff that tastes like plastic. Make a potato salad too, so there's variety. For dessert, buy good peaches and grapes. If you buy cheap fruit, nobody eats it. And wine, make sure it's a good Napa Red, not the one from last time that tasted like water. Immediately after, my sister-in-law Rachel joined in. Claire, don't forget garlic chicken wings. My kids love them. And my younger sister-in-law Emily added a smiling emoji. And buy low-sugar drinkable yogurts for the little ones, please. I looked at the screen with pressed lips. Nobody asked if it was convenient for me. Nobody said even the minimum courtesy, like, if it's too much trouble, don't worry. They simply assumed I was the chef, the waitress, the person paying the bill, and the one who should receive them with a smile at the door. I turned off the screen, but less than 10 minutes later, Ethan called. Yes? Did you see the messages? His voice was very sharp. Yes. Then when you get off work, stop by the grocery store and buy everything. I have to go to the bus station to pick up the uncles and Rachel's family. I laughed. My laugh must have irritated him because he went silent for a few seconds. Ethan, let me ask you something. Do you think I'm your wife or your whole family's housekeeper? He snapped immediately. You're starting again. I'm starting? Who has been imposing things since last night? Ethan, listen to me clearly. This house is not a bus station or a restaurant, and I have no obligation to serve your entire family just because they feel like coming. On the other side of the line, there was a heavy silence. Then he replied, every word loaded with restrained anger. What you want is to humiliate me in front of everyone, right? I closed my eyes. In the end, it was always the same. His image. It was always about his image. My exhaustion, my distress, my dignity in my own house. None of that was important enough to mention, I said slowly. If a man's image depends on forcing his wife to serve his entire family, then that image is not worth much. I hung up. This time, my hand did not shake. On the contrary, a strange lightness filled me, a lightness that almost frightened me. In the afternoon, I asked to leave work an hour early, but I did not go home. First, I went to the bank. The personal savings account I had opened 2 years ago did not have a ridiculous amount of money, but it was enough for me to live comfortably for a while without depending on anyone. Then I went into a phone store and bought a new SIM card. Standing at the counter, looking at that small card in my hand, I felt as if it were a new door opening, a door without my mother-in-law's insistent messages, without my sisters-in-law's orders, without my husband's calls asking me to endure a little longer. After that, I went to a luggage store. The cream suitcase I had taken out that morning was only good for a couple of days. I bought a larger one, light gray, practical, sturdy. Going on a long trip? The clerk asked with a smile. I looked at myself in the mirror in front of me. My face was strangely calm. Anyone seeing me would have thought I was preparing for a normal trip. Yes, I answered. Probably a fairly long one. When I left the store, I sat in a cafe across from the mall and took out my phone to check the security cameras at home. The front door was still closed. The living room was tidy, but I knew that calm was about to end. I looked at the clock. 4:10. In only a few hours, a crowd would enter that apartment with the sole intention of enjoying themselves. And in only a few hours, they would understand what it meant to be left hanging when the person automatically expected to be in the kitchen simply disappeared. I leaned back in the chair, slowly stirring my tea. For the first time in many years, I did not feel that I was running to please anyone. I was simply sitting calmly, preparing to recover my own life. Exactly at 4:30, the front door camera showed Ethan's familiar figure. He opened the door and entered first, carrying 2 large bags. Behind him came my mother-in-law, then my sisters-in-law, and several children who burst into the house like birds flying out of a cage. Sitting in the cafe, watching every frame on my phone screen, I felt my chest grow colder little by little. The moment she entered, my mother-in-law scanned the living room and said in her characteristic voice, "Well, the place isn't bad. Ethan told me that Claire girl is very clean." My sister-in-law Rachel added with a little laugh, "Of course she cleans. If she doesn't, who will? Women have to keep the house in order." Such a light sentence, yet it made me burst out laughing in the middle of the cafe. Women have to keep order. Women have to cook. Women have to serve. Women have to be understanding. And men only have to stand in the middle, enjoy everything, and offer a compliment once in a while to feel they have contributed. The children were already running and jumping everywhere. One climbed onto the sofa. Stepping on the cream-colored backrest I protected so carefully that I did not even allow anyone to eat on it. Another grabbed a cushion and began throwing it around. I watched without flinching. Before, I would have panicked, calling home to ask them to be careful or rushing back. But today, I simply stayed still. This time, I was not going to save the situation. My phone vibrated again. It was Ethan. I let it ring almost to the end before answering. "What?" His voice no longer had the restraint of the morning. It sounded sharp and heavy. "Where are you?" "I'm out." "Out where?" "I think that's not as important as asking yourself whether I'm coming back or not." Ethan lowered his voice. I could clearly hear the children shouting in the background, the TV at full volume, and my mother-in-law calling out loudly, "Claire, don't go too far. Everyone's already here. Come home right now." I looked at the glass of water in front of me with surprising calm. "I remember making myself very clear this morning, and I remember perfectly that you never asked whether I wanted to organize this dinner." He went silent for a few seconds and then muttered between his teeth, "Are you really going to leave my whole family here waiting?" I'm going to let your whole family understand that they have no right to order from my house like it's a restaurant." On the other side of the line, there was a loud thud, as if he had slammed his fist on the table. Ethan was probably red with anger. "Claire, enough. If you don't come home tonight, I swear you'll regret it." I laughed. Not a happy laugh, but the kind that comes when you finally see your opponent's old trick clearly. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm not threatening you, but understand this. I'm not the one who pushed you into this." I hung up. This time, I blocked his number on my main phone. I switched to the new SIM, put it into an old spare phone, and sent my mother a short message. "Mom, I'm coming to stay with you for a few days." Less than a minute later, she answered, "Did something happen, sweetheart?" I stared at that sentence for a long time, the same question I had rarely heard from my husband's family in all these years. Not, "Where are you?" or "What are you doing?" but, "Did something happen?" I replied, "I'm a little tired, Mom. I want to come home." My mother responded instantly, "Come, sweetheart, home is always waiting for you." That sentence alone was enough to fill my eyes with tears. I looked outside. The streetlights were beginning to turn on. Traffic flowed as it did any other day, in a city so large and crowded. And yet there had been moments when I felt I had no place to breathe until my mother wrote those words. "Home is always waiting for you." I opened the airline app and searched for a late flight to Charleston that same night. There were still a few seats. I booked one immediately. Then I sat silently for a few seconds, feeling my heart beat steady, without trembling, without doubt, without guilt. At that moment, the home camera showed my mother-in-law walking straight into the kitchen. She opened the fridge and froze. I could almost imagine her expression. In the fridge, there was only water, a couple of yogurts I had bought for myself, some fruit, and simple leftovers for 2 people. No trace of the meat or fish they assumed they would find. No pot of broth prepared, no trays of ready-to-cook food, nothing. My mother-in-law turned sharply and shouted, "Ethan!" Her voice was so shrill that the camera microphone distorted the sound. "Where is the food?" My sister-in-law Rachel also ran in, opening more cabinets. "There's nothing here." The children kept laughing and playing, but the adults' faces began to change. I watched the scene, and my lips slowly curved into a smile. Not out of simple gloating, but because for the first time, the inconvenience was no longer falling only on me. For the first time, those who had always taken me for granted were beginning to taste the sensation of being left suspended in midair. My phone screen lit up nonstop. This time it was my mother-in-law calling, then my sister-in-law, then the other one. I looked at the calls and did not answer. A moment later, the family WhatsApp group filled with messages. My mother-in-law wrote angrily, "Claire, where have you gone? Come back immediately. We're all here. What kind of daughter-in-law are you, behaving like this?" I read those lines, took a deep breath, and stood up, grabbing my bag. It was time to leave the city for a few days and let them handle the dinner they believed I had been born to serve. I called a rideshare to take me to the airport just as evening began to fall. During the ride, I kept the home camera open. I do not know whether it was to make sure everything unfolded as expected, or whether part of me needed to see with my own eyes the moment that family faced the reality I had endured alone for years. On the screen, my living room was already chaos. My mother-in-law stood with her hands on her hips in the middle of the room, her face gloomy. Rachel went back and forth from the kitchen to the living room, searching every drawer. Emily rocked her crying child while complaining non-stop. The children had begun protesting that they were hungry, and in the middle of it all was Ethan. With a phone in one hand and the other on his hip, his face showed a mixture of anger and disorientation. I had never seen him so lost. Before, every time his relatives came over, he was completely relaxed. He smiled, served drinks, sat down to chat, and once in a while peeked into the kitchen to ask, out of obligation, how things were going. The most exhausting, dirtiest, most stressful part was mine. That was why he had time to be a devoted son, an attentive nephew, and a man who looked good in front of his family. But tonight, without me to hold it all together, that facade of serenity collapsed faster than I had imagined. I had just gotten out of the car at the airport when the spare phone rang with an unknown number. I knew instantly that it was Ethan. I stopped outside the terminal, watching the number blink for a few seconds before answering. "What else do you want?" His voice was so aggressive it almost sounded like shouting. "Where are you?" "At the airport." On the other side, absolute silence. A silence so deep that I could hear someone in the background ask, "Did you find her? What did she say?" A few seconds later, Ethan's voice exploded, tense like a violin string. "Have you lost your mind? Making this whole circus over one simple dinner?" I looked up at the departure screens, my voice monotone. "It's not about one dinner. It's because for 3 years, all of you have believed I had the obligation to cook that dinner. Claire, don't talk to me in plural like I'm one of them. I'm speaking accurately." He breathed heavily. "Come home right now. Everyone is waiting." "I'm not coming back." Ethan choked for a moment and then changed tone, moving from anger into the old attempt at persuasion. "Fine. I'm sorry. I admit I should have asked you before. Come back, and after they leave, we'll talk." I let out a small laugh. Even in that situation, he still thought an apology would be enough for me to turn around obediently. "Are you sorry because you truly understand my exhaustion, or because your family has no one to cook for them?" Ethan fell silent. That silence was more revealing than any answer, I continued. "From beginning to end, you have not been worried about my well-being. You've only been worried that I'm not there to solve your problem." In the background I heard my mother-in-law's shrill voice. "Tell her to come back now. She can go wherever she wants after. But first she needs to make us dinner." Hearing that sent a chill through me. Even at that moment, the only thing she thought about was dinner, not why her daughter-in-law had left, not that her son's marriage was on the edge of a cliff. No, the important thing was that I returned to cook. I gripped the phone tightly. "Ethan, listen carefully. I am not coming back. And if you feel humiliated, if you are in trouble, if you cannot manage your family, that is your problem. Starting today, do not assume it is mine too." I hung up. This time, I turned off the spare phone as well. The instant the screen went black, I felt that a long chapter of my life had also gone dark. I dragged the suitcase into the terminal to check in. Around me, people came and went. Announcements sounded at regular intervals. The noise of suitcase wheels on the floor mixed with travelers' hurried steps. Nobody knew I had just left behind a house sunk in chaos, and nobody knew it had taken me 3 years to dare to leave like that. Once I checked my luggage, I sat in the waiting area and turned my main phone back on. Notifications appeared in a cascade. More than 30 missed calls, dozens of messages. The family group would not stop moving. I opened it. My mother-in-law had sent a series of voice messages. I did not need to listen to know the content, but this time I pressed play. Her voice was shrill and full of indignation. "Claire, You really think you're something. What kind of daughter-in-law leaves her husband's whole family waiting hungry? Have you ever seen anyone behave like this? Come back here right now. The next message was from Rachel. You went too far, Claire. Mom is older. Even if you're angry, you should think of the elders a little. Emily was softer, but every word tried to drag me back to the same place. Come back first, sister-in-law, and then you and Ethan can talk. Don't leave him in such an uncomfortable situation. I kept reading. A cousin from Ethan's family had written directly in the group. A married woman needs to know her place. Making this scene just because her in-laws came to dinner, I stared at that sentence for a long while. Know her place. Again those words. The moment a woman starts defending herself, they immediately say she does not know her place. But if she grits her teeth and endures, if she nods no matter how exhausted she is, then they praise her for being understanding. Good, a blessing. I took screenshots of the entire conversation, every phrase, every jab, every order. I did not know whether I would need them in the future, but I knew this time I would not let anyone say I had left for no reason. I looked up toward the runway. The signal lights formed bright streaks. A plane rolled slowly. Suddenly, I felt strangely light. Not because I was happy, but because at last I no longer had to run home to clean up a disaster I had not created. I no longer had to pretend kindness to keep peace with people who had never respected my dignity. I no longer had to swallow tears in a suffocating kitchen. For the first time in 3 years, I allowed myself to walk away, and that feeling, though painful, made me feel alive again. The plane took off at 8:45 p.m. As the cabin vibrated while accelerating down the runway before lifting from the ground, I rested my head against the seat and watched the city lights grow smaller through the window. Chicago at night was still beautiful, so beautiful as if nobody there had to swallow tears in a kitchen until dawn, so beautiful as if nobody felt like a stranger in the apartment she had bought with her own money. I closed my eyes. The steady hum of the engines relaxed me after such a tense day, but my mind did not rest. I knew that at that hour, in my apartment, that dinner had turned into a complete disaster. I could imagine every scene. My mother-in-law sitting with a sour face, Rachel complaining, Emily trying to calm her child while whining, the children crying and asking for food, and Ethan, for the first time, standing in the middle of all that chaos, understanding what it meant to feel cornered. I did not turn the phone back on. I did not want to hear more criticism. At that moment, there were sounds that, if heard one more time, could drag a person back into the same vicious cycle, and I did not want to return. A flight attendant passed with the cart and asked whether I wanted anything. I only requested a cup of hot water. Holding the cup with both hands, I suddenly remembered all those nights when my husband's family visited. They ate, laughed, watched TV, criticized, and then went to sleep, and I stayed alone cleaning everything. The sink full of dishes, the counter sticky with oil, the floor stained with the children's footprints, cushions scattered everywhere. There were nights when I finished close to 2 in the morning, with back pain so strong I could barely straighten up. Ethan would pass by me, look at me, and say, "Hurry up and go to bed." "Aren't you going to help me?" I would ask. He would yawn. "I have to get up early tomorrow." I remember being left speechless, because if I said one more thing, I was sure he would accuse me of always calculating everything. My marriage did not break because of one blow, one insult, or one scandalous betrayal. It rotted little by little through details like that, small details repeated again and again until one day, looking back, I no longer recognized how I had lived the last 3 years. Around 9:30 p.m., the plane began descending. The lights of Charleston appeared beneath the wing, peaceful, familiar, and bright. I turned on the phone as soon as we landed. On the new SIM, I had only 2 messages, one from the phone company and one from my mother. "When you land, let me know. Your father is waiting outside." I read it and felt a lump in my throat. It was always like that, without asking why, without reproaches, without demanding immediate explanations, simply waiting. When I came out with my suitcase, I saw my father almost immediately. He stood among the crowd waiting for relatives, wearing his old gray jacket, his tall, thin figure searching with his eyes. The moment I approached, he took my suitcase. "How was the trip?" "Fine, Dad." "Are you tired?" That question alone was enough to make my eyes wet. I shook my head. "I'm fine." He looked at me for a few seconds, as if wanting to ask more, but in the end, he only nodded. "We'll talk at home." In the car, I rested my head against the window. Charleston at night was not too noisy. Cool air slipped into the car. My father played the instrumental music my mother liked. During the entire drive, he did not pressure me to tell him anything. That silence did not suffocate me. On the contrary, it felt like a warm blanket after days of cold. When we arrived home, my mother was already waiting at the door. The moment she saw me, she came quickly. "Come in, sweetheart. I warmed up some soup." I looked at the small dinner on the table. Only 3 simple dishes: fish and sauce, zucchini soup, and green beans. Nothing showy, nothing complicated, nothing meant to impress. But the moment I sat down, I felt a lump in my throat again. My mother served me a piece of fish. "Eat. You look thinner." I picked up the fork with trembling hands. That was when I realized that what hurt me most that night was not my husband's family's abuse, but the fact that I had become so used to it that I had forgotten what it felt like to be treated with ordinary kindness. After a few bites, my mother asked softly, "Did something happen with Ethan?" I raised my eyes and met hers, full of worry and tenderness. The armor I had maintained all day cracked. I put down the fork. My voice came out hoarse. "I'm so tired, Mom." She did not ask more. She only took my hand. "Well, you're home now. Rest." Such a simple sentence, but it made tears fall into my plate before I realized it. I quickly turned to wipe them away, but my parents had already seen. My father sighed and poured me a glass of water. "Whatever happens, don't worry. You have us." Sitting in my parents' small kitchen, listening to the faint clink of utensils, smelling the warm steam from the soup, hearing myself cry quietly, I felt as if something inside me had broken and, at the same time, been freed. That night, for the first time in a long time, I did not have to worry about messes, late-night cleaning, or whether someone would ask me for something. I was only my parents' daughter, and I had finally reached the place where I no longer needed to pretend. I slept straight through until almost 9 in the morning, without nightmares, without jolting awake at the sound of a door, without waking in the middle of the night to the drag of slippers in the hallway, the crying of a child, or my mother-in-law's voice asking me to get up and make her tea. When I opened my eyes, I stayed in bed for a while, staring at the familiar ceiling of my old room. The light blue curtains my mother had changed last year moved softly with the breeze. The wooden shelf beside the window was still full of the novels I had loved in college. Nothing here was new, but everything made me feel lighter than any luxurious place ever had. As soon as I sat up, the spare phone in my bag began vibrating. I took it out. More than 50 missed calls and a screen full of messages. Most were from Ethan, my mother-in-law, and my sisters-in-law. I did not open them immediately. I went to the bathroom, washed my face, got dressed, and went downstairs to the kitchen. My mother was making toast. Hearing my steps, she turned and smiled. "You're awake." I nodded. "I overslept." "If you're tired, you need sleep to recover," she said as if it were the most normal thing in the world. I sat at the table watching my mother move easily in front of the stove and felt a mixture of warmth and bitterness. Here, I did not need to explain myself, pretend I was fine, or prove to anyone how competent, capable, or understanding I was. My father came in from the patio with the newspaper in his hand, looked at me, and said only one thing. "Stay home and rest today." "Okay," I answered quietly. My parents did not pressure me, but their silence was not indifference. It was waiting, giving me time until I was ready to speak. After breakfast, I took the phone out to the porch and began reading the messages. The first one from Ethan, sent around 7 the previous evening, said, "Come home right now." The second, "Claire, stop making a fool of yourself." The third, "Where are you?" Then a series of missed calls. Around 9 at night, the tone changed. "Answer the phone. We need to talk. Mom is furious and everyone is in a bad mood." Later, when I had turned off the phone, the messages became more desperate and chaotic. "You made me lose all credibility. We had to eat sandwiches and takeout. Are you happy? How long are you planning to keep this up?" I read it all with an unmoved heart. How strange. A year earlier, those same phrases would have filled me with panic. I would have blamed myself, thinking maybe I had gone too far, that I should return and explain. But now, no. I no longer felt panic. I only saw things more clearly. I saw that even in the middle of chaos, what mattered most to him was still his image, his family's bad mood, his family's ruined dinner. I, the person they had pushed into leaving, still was not the protagonist of any of his sentences. I kept reading my mother-in-law's messages. "Very nicely done. You get married and still act like some spoiled lady. You can't even organize one simple dinner. If you have any decency, come back and apologize." I let out a bitter laugh. One simple dinner. How easy it sounded. But behind that simple dinner was shopping, choosing ingredients, preparing them, cooking, serving, cleaning, hosting guests, giving up my space, enduring, and finally smiling. All that effort, in their eyes, was reduced to one simple dinner. I opened Rachel's message. "You should think about Ethan a little. Men already get tired enough working outside. They need a woman who supports them at home. Your in-laws come to dinner once and you put on this show." Reading that, the screen blurred before my eyes. Not because I was about to cry, but from pure exhaustion. Tired of hearing those words repeated for years. Women always had to think, endure, understand, know their place, support. And men only had to work outside and, by default, had the right to detach from everything else. I turned off the phone. Just then, a call came from an unknown number. I assumed it was Ethan calling from another phone, so I answered. His voice came immediately, hoarse and heavy. "Finally, you pick up." I leaned back in the chair. "What else do you want to say?" "I want to ask how long you plan to continue like this." "Like what?" "Leaving and making my family look ridiculous." I paused for 2 seconds and then responded very slowly. "And during the last 3 years, when I had to serve your family nonstop in my own house, did you ever think I was the one being made ridiculous?" Ethan was speechless. "Don't bring up old things." "Old things? Your mother going through my personal belongings is an old thing? Your relatives turning my house into their free hotel is an old thing? Me having to clean alone after every visit from your family is an old thing? And now you want me to swallow it again so everything becomes peaceful for you and this too becomes an old thing?" My voice was not loud, but as I spoke, I felt my throat burn. On the other end, there was a long silence. Then he lowered his voice. "I admit I was wrong yesterday, but you shouldn't have acted like that either." I laughed bitterly. Always the same. I was wrong, but you too. Guilt always divided equally. How convenient. Even when the damage was never divided equally. Ethan, you don't understand. What I refuse to accept is not one dinner. It's that you and your entire family have always taken for granted that everything I do is my obligation. I'm tired. As I said that, I heard my mother's voice from the porch. "Sweetheart, come in and have some orange juice." Such a simple sentence. And suddenly I felt a knot in my throat. Ethan heard it too. He went silent. "I'm at my house," I continued. Then I hung up. This time, my hand did not shake. I left the phone on the table and looked at the sunlight illuminating the patio. A strange sensation moved through my chest. It was not triumph or sadness. It was like someone stepping out of a suffocating room and finally being able to breathe deeply. And in that breath, I began to understand that I had not only walked away from a dinner. Little by little, I was walking away from a marriage where I was expected to sacrifice more than I was loved. That afternoon, I asked my parents if I could go out for a while. My mother did not ask where. She only told me to eat something before coming back. I nodded, took my bag, and walked to a quiet cafe near the house. I needed a silent place to think clearly about my next step. If my intention had simply been to leave for a few days to calm my anger, I would not have bought a new SIM card, taken my documents, or captured screenshots of the family group messages. I knew perfectly well that this was beyond a momentary impulse. It was the result of 3 years of restraint. And if I did not use my current clarity to put things in order, there was a good chance they would drag me back into the same routine with a couple of half apologies, a few reproaches, and the tears of an elder, and I would end up giving in again. I ordered hot tea, opened my laptop, and began making a list. First, review the apartment documents. Second, verify my personal accounts. Third, count every time Ethan's family had stayed at the house, the grocery expenses, and the repairs of things they had broken. Before, I did these things to remind myself not to live with my eyes closed. I never thought that one day every number would become proof of how much I had carried for that family. I opened an old notes file. Everything was there. The time Rachel stayed with her 2 children for 4 days. More than $300 at the grocery store, and $120 to clean the rug and sofa. The time Ethan's brother brought his friends over and they burned the stone countertop, almost $200 for a professional to polish it. The time my mother-in-law stayed more than a month, and the household expenses doubled, not counting the things she gave away to her relatives. I read each line with a lump in my throat. Before, I had written these things in anger. Now, reviewing them, I realized the scariest thing was not the money, but how accustomed I had become to that erosion. The phone rang. It was Ethan, this time from his number. Maybe he assumed I no longer had him blocked. I looked at the screen for a while and answered. His voice sounded much more tired than in the morning. "What are you doing?" "I'm busy. I want to talk calmly. Last night and this morning weren't enough?" He sighed. "Claire, I know you're angry. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just seeing things clearly." On the other side, dead silence. A few seconds later, he asked, "What do you mean by that?" "That now I see this marriage more clearly. You and your family have always assumed I had to take care of everything, give in, endure it, to the point that when I refused, all of you treated me like the guilty one." Ethan's voice hardened a little. "Don't put all the blame on me. I don't need to. The blame is already there." I closed the laptop and looked out at the street. Traffic kept moving. The afternoon sun faded over the sidewalks. Everything outside remained the same. Only my life was taking a new direction. Ethan continued in a lower voice. "I'm not denying I was inconsiderate. But you have to understand me. They're my parents, my siblings. Of course I understand. That's why I endured for 3 years. That's why I opened the doors of my house again and again. That's why I cooked, cleaned, smiled, and tried to be the wife who wouldn't embarrass you. I understood so much that I forgot to understand myself." Saying the last sentence made my voice crack. There are truths that only truly hurt when spoken out loud. Ethan remained silent for a long while. Then he asked, "What do you want?" I straightened in the chair. It was the first time in a long time that he had asked me that question. Not, "What do you want me to do?" but, "What do you want?" I answered slowly. "I want respect. I want my house not to become an unconditional reception hall. I want every decision that affects my life to include my opinion. I want that when you are between your family and me, you at least remember that first, you are my husband." Ethan let out a nearly inaudible laugh, but without joy. "And if I can't do all that," I paused, then told the truth, "then I will have to make my own decisions for my life." Again, silence. This time longer, heavier. I knew he was beginning to understand. Not that I was angry, but that I could truly leave this marriage. Before hanging up, Ethan said only one thing. "Give me some time." I did not answer yes or no. I simply hung up. I reopened the laptop and continued my list. This time without tears, with the clarity of someone who had finally learned to stand on her own side. I did not know whether this marriage could be saved. But I did know one thing. Whatever the outcome, I would not go back to being the shadow I had been. That night, when I returned home, I found my mother sitting in the living room peeling an orange. My father read the newspaper beside her with his glasses at the tip of his nose, raising his eyes now and then to look at me. The atmosphere was as calm as always, and that very calm pressed against my heart. I sat beside them and took a slice of orange my mother offered, feeling my throat dry. "Did you talk to Ethan?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes." "And?" I smiled bitterly. "The same as always, Mom. He asked for time." My mother was silent for a few seconds, then asked very softly, "And you?" I raised my eyes. "Me what? Do you still want to wait?" That question left me frozen. I had thought a lot about my mother-in-law, Ethan, the apartment in Chicago, the money, all the times they had disrespected me, but I had never stopped to ask myself whether I still wanted to wait. I lowered my eyes to my hands. In recent years, I had waited a lot. Waited for Ethan to notice. Waited for him to be less thoughtless. Waited for his mother to stop interfering. Waited for his relatives to have more tact. Waited for my patience to be rewarded with a little respect. I waited so much that I was the one who ended up exhausted. "I don't know, Mom," I said quietly. My father put the newspaper on the table. His voice was calm. "If you don't know, take your time. But remember one thing. Never force yourself to return to a place that drains you just because you're afraid of disappointing others." I stayed still. His words were not forceful or dramatic, but each one struck the center of my pain. For a long time, I had always been afraid. Afraid that if I stood up for myself, people would think I was selfish. Afraid that if I refused, Ethan would look bad. Afraid that if I left, they would say I was a bad wife. Afraid of everything except losing myself. The next morning, a call from an unknown number woke me. I hesitated for a few seconds and answered. My mother-in-law's voice came through, shrill and sharp as a knife. "Claire, you really are clever." I sat up abruptly. Before I could say anything, she continued. I have never seen such a shameless daughter-in-law. You run off to enjoy yourself and leave your husband alone in a mess. Do you know how people laughed at us last night? I paused and then asked, did they laugh at you, or did they laugh at me? And you dare ask? Why wouldn't I dare? From the beginning, all of you entered my house, asked for food, chose rooms, ordered me to buy this and that, and nobody asked whether I agreed. Now that everything has exploded, why am I the only one blamed? She choked for a moment and then shouted, you are the daughter-in-law. It is your duty. I raised Ethan to be a man, and now that he is married, are you going to make him carry the burden of the family? I gripped the phone tightly. Carrying a burden does not mean allowing his whole family to climb on my back. Since we got married, I have endured more than enough. I respect you because you are Ethan's mother, but do not confuse my respect with the right to arrange my life however you please. On the other side, there was a deadly silence. Maybe she had not expected me to speak so directly. A few seconds later, her voice sounded lower but colder. Fine. Since you speak that way, I'll say it clearly. If you want to continue being Ethan's wife, you need to come back and apologize. If not, forget this house and this family. Don't set foot here again. Hearing that, I laughed. A soft laugh, but the laugh of someone who finally understands that the other side has never considered her family. If I were family, how could you throw me out of an apartment I paid for mostly myself? I said slowly, word by word. Do not worry about whether I set foot in that house again. That is not your decision. And perhaps you should know that house is not a place where just anyone can arrive and throw out whoever they please. I hung up with my heart racing, but unlike other times, I was not trembling. I sat on the bed, breathed deeply, and opened my laptop. I began reviewing all the apartment documentation, the deed, payment receipts, bank transfers. I no longer wanted to speak from emotion. From now on, everything had to be clear. It was time for those who used morality to crush me to understand that beyond morality there are limits, signed papers, and the price paid for underestimating a woman for too long. I spent almost 2 hours in front of the laptop, the blank screen, the numbers, the dates, the scanned files from the apartment purchase. Everything was so clear it felt chilling. I opened each folder, the purchase contract, transfer receipts, mortgage payment schedule, the Excel sheet I had created myself to track expenses. Everything was intact, and the more I looked, the more ironic my last 3 years seemed. So organized, so careful, I had invested almost all my energy, money, and time into that house. And yet, there were moments when they had cornered me so much that I wondered whether I was exaggerating just because I did not want to cook for 16 people. Just then, the phone vibrated. It was Ethan. This time, I looked at his name on the screen for a long while before answering. His voice sounded completely hoarse. Did you talk to my mother? Yes. Was it necessary to speak to her like that? I leaned back in the chair. It was necessary. Do you know how angry she is? I know. And do you know how I've lived the last 3 years? On the other end, total silence. I did not give him time to dodge the question. Ethan, you wanted to talk properly? Then today I'm going to say everything once and for all. I did not leave because of one dinner. I left because for 3 years, your family has entered my life as if it were their house. I left because every time they crossed my boundaries, you stood there watching. I left because you became so used to my care that you thought it was my obligation. Ethan took a deep breath. I didn't think it was that serious. I laughed. Of course. You never thought it was serious because you weren't the one in the kitchen. You weren't the one cleaning the mess. You weren't the one enduring your mother touching your things, your relatives judging everything, the children jumping on the sofa. You weren't the one treated like a servant in your own home. Ethan's voice faded. I know I failed. I don't need you to say that just to close the subject. I need you to understand where you failed. You didn't hit me. You didn't insult me. But you allowed me to be consumed, and sometimes that is worse. On the other side, a long silence. This time I could hear him swallow. Maybe, at last, he was beginning to face everything he had always avoided. Do you want a divorce? He asked quietly. That question echoed through the phone, falling into my silent room and making my fingers stop over the keyboard. I looked at the laptop screen, where the numbers of the down payment, renovation, and furniture remained clear, dry, unemotional. I said very slowly, I have not said divorce, but I also do not want to go back to before. Ethan seemed to let out a breath of relief, but I did not allow him to misunderstand it as a sign that he could simply calm the waters. Let me be clear. From now on, if you want us to keep talking, it has to be with respect. Not with your mother screaming, your sister pressuring, and you standing in the middle asking me to endure. And forget the idea that I will return just to save your family's image. Ethan's voice broke. Are you really speaking to me in those terms? I closed my eyes for a moment. Even in this situation, he still used the word terms, as if everything I said were about money, about winning or losing. Ethan, I'm not calculating. I'm saving myself. There was no response. I opened the deed file, found the ownership section, and continued with a calmness that surprised even me. And since we're speaking clearly, let me remind you, the apartment in Chicago was paid for mostly with my money and my parents' help. The deed, bank statements, receipts, I have everything. Do not let your mother think she has the right to throw me out of there. On the other end, Ethan seemed to lose his breath. You're really talking to me about the house like that? I should have done it long ago, Ethan. My mistake during these 3 years was being too afraid to be clear. I thought that if I was direct, I would hurt you. But the more I stayed silent, the further your family advanced. This time, he did not answer immediately. I could feel a long silence, as if he were sitting alone in that family-filled house that, for the first time, felt strange to him. A moment later, he asked, "What do you want me to do?" I looked at the notebook open beside me. Since the morning, I had written down a few things. Not to pressure him, but so I would not soften, so I would not avoid the point. I want you to do 3 things. First, make it clear to your mother and your entire family that this house is not a place where they can bring whoever they want. Second, from now on, any visit must be discussed with me first. Third, understand and admit that I have no obligation to serve your family. I am your wife, not the logistics manager for all your relatives. Just as I finished, I heard the porch door open. My mother entered with a glass of water, placed it gently on the table, and left silently. She did not ask anything. She only feared my throat would dry from talking so much. I followed her with my eyes, my heart tightening. On the other side, Ethan spoke. I need time to do all that. I've already given you 3 years. As soon as I said it, both of us fell silent. I did not want to hurt him, but it was true. I had given him 3 years to realize, to change, to stand on the side of our marriage. And in return, I received a dinner for 16 people imposed like an order. After a while, Ethan said very quietly, "Fine. I'll talk to my mother. I'll wait to see what you do. I'm not promising anything right now." I don't need promises. I'll watch what you do. I hung up and sat silently for a long while. Outside, the afternoon sun had softened. Inside me, there was no storm anymore, only a cold, clear, firm feeling. I knew that from that moment, my marriage had entered a new phase, one in which I would no longer be the one stepping back so others could move forward. The next morning, right after breakfast, Ethan called. I looked at his name on the screen for a long time before answering. His voice sounded completely hoarse, as if he had not slept all night. "Can you come back for a moment?" I did not answer immediately. "For what? There are some things I think you should see for yourself." I frowned. "Speak clearly." On the other side, a silence of a few seconds. "My mother and my sister are arguing. Since last night, the house has been chaos, and everything is very messy." I let out a bitter laugh. "Only now, do you realize it's messy? Before, when I cleaned until exhaustion, you told me I could get it done in a minute. I want you to come back so you can see I'm not exaggerating. You want me to come back to see the disaster your family created, right?" His voice cracked. "I want you to come back so we can talk clearly." I leaned back in the chair, looking at the sunny patio in front of my parents' house. The bougainvillea my mother had planted swayed in the breeze. That peaceful scene made everything even clearer. I did not want to return because they asked me to. If I returned, it would be by my own decision. "I'll come back," I said slowly. "But not to apologize and not to play the role of the woman who cleans." "I know," Ethan answered quickly. "This time, I know." I said nothing more. After hanging up, I told my parents. "You really want to go back?" my mother asked. I nodded. "I need some documents and my personal things." My father, who had been silent, said, "I'm going with you." I looked at him. "It's not necessary, Dad." "It is necessary," he answered dryly. "I won't go inside. I'll wait downstairs." Such a simple sentence, but it moved me deeply. I knew my father no longer trusted my husband's family. He did not want to leave me alone in the place that had hurt me. During the trip back from Charleston to Chicago, I barely slept, not because I was nervous, but because in my head I was preparing every word I would say. There are things that, once you decide to face them, you cannot let emotions guide you. You have to be clear, lucid, and cold. That afternoon, my father dropped me at the entrance of the building. He did not get out of the car. He only turned to look at me. "If anything happens, call me." "Yes, Dad." When I reached the apartment door, voices arguing inside were already audible. It was not a scandal, but it was enough to know the atmosphere was not calm. I rang the bell. Ethan opened. When he saw me, he froze. In just over a day, he seemed to have aged years. His shirt was wrinkled, his beard unshaven, his eyes tired and red, but what caught my attention most was not him, but the scene behind him. My living room was unrecognizable. Takeout wrappers on the table, cushions on the floor, a brown stain on the sofa, the floor full of children's footprints, and in one corner of the wall, beside the TV cabinet, scribbles made with colored markers. I stood still for a few seconds, not out of surprise, but because seeing it with my own eyes hurt more than I had imagined. For 3 years, after every visit from his family, I had cleaned in silence so everything could return to normal. I did it so quickly, so well, so discreetly, that Ethan never had to see the real consequences of what they caused. Today, at last, he was seeing it. My mother-in-law came out of the kitchen. The moment she saw me, her face darkened. "So you finally decided to come back?" I looked at her without blinking. "I came to collect my things." My response unsettled her. She had probably expected me to be more submissive, more conciliatory. But I was no longer in the mood for that. Rachel also stood from the living room with a sarcastic tone. "Well, look at you. You leave and everything falls apart." I turned to look at her. "Everything falls apart because there is no longer anyone carrying all of it." She glared at me. "And you think it's nice to say it that way?" "Why not? From the beginning, every time you came here, did anyone ask if I was tired? Did anyone think this house was my home and not a free hotel? Did anyone consider that bringing so many people, making a mess, and ordering food like a menu was an inconvenience to me?" The atmosphere in the living room froze. My mother-in-law slammed the table. "How dare you speak to your elders that way?" I looked directly at her. "I'm speaking normally. The only difference is that for the first time, I'm not enduring silently." Ethan, beside me, seemed about to step in to calm things down, but I raised my hand to stop him. "You don't say anything. I want to finish speaking." I walked a few steps, looking at the room I had cared for so much, down to the last glass, the last tablecloth. Then I turned to Ethan. "You told me to come back to see everything clearly, right? Well, I've seen it. I see it more clearly than ever. Without me, your family cannot even organize one dinner or keep a house decent. And still, for 3 years, all of you assumed it was my obligation. My voice was not loud, but every word fell like a nail. Not even Ethan could argue. He stood pale. He knew this time nobody could use the excuse of, "It's just dinner," to minimize the matter, because the battlefield was right in front of them, and that battlefield was the one I had cleaned alone for so long. My mother-in-law stood in the middle of the living room, red with anger. She looked at me as if I were a complete stranger. No. More accurately, for the first time she was truly looking at me, not the daughter-in-law who cooked, cleaned, and obeyed, but the person who had stepped out of the role she was used to directing. She pointed at me. "You speak very well. If not for you, this family couldn't live. Is that it?" I looked at her pointing finger and then at her. This family would continue living. It simply would no longer have someone cleaning the mess in silence. Rachel gave a cold laugh. "You talk like you're the only one who suffers. None of us has it easy." I nodded. "That's true. Everyone has problems. But your problems are not an excuse to load mine onto my shoulders." Ethan remained still, clenching and unclenching his fists. I knew he felt suffocated. Probably, for the first time in his life, he had been pulled out of his comfortable, neutral position. He could no longer hide behind phrases like, "Be patient with my mother," or, "It's family, don't be like that." Today, he either faced reality or lost everything. I put my bag on a chair, opened the zipper, and took out a thin folder of documents. Ethan's expression changed completely. He stared at the papers in my hand as if he guessed what I was about to do. "What is that?" my mother-in-law asked, frowning. What I should have made clear a long time ago. I placed the folder on the table with a firm voice. "Before we continue talking about duties, in-laws, and how I should behave, I think we should talk about this house." The living room went silent. Ethan took a step forward. "Claire, I turned to him. You wanted to talk clearly? Then today we will make everything clear. I opened the folder and took out a copy of the purchase agreement, the deed, and the transfer receipts. I placed each paper neatly on the table. The total price of this apartment was more than $800,000. Of that amount, my parents contributed $500,000. I put in more than $200,000 from my savings. Your family's contribution was $20,000. I paused. And the monthly mortgage is paid by me. The air in the room seemed to vanish. My mother-in-law blinked incredulously. Rachel looked at the papers and then at Ethan. And Ethan was white as paper. I looked at all of them and continued. The ownership percentage in the deed is very clear. I own 99%. Ethan owns 1%. That's impossible, Rachel exclaimed. Why impossible? I never hid it. I simply did not want to bring up money before, so as not to embarrass anyone. You all became used to my silence and thought I had no limits. My mother-in-law slammed the table. Are you threatening us with your money? I'm not threatening anyone. I'm telling the truth. And the truth is that this house is not a place where anyone can enter, organize whatever they want, or throw me out as they please. Saying this, I turned to look directly at my mother-in-law. When you told me that if I wanted to remain Ethan's wife, I had to return and apologize, or else never set foot here again, you said it very confidently. But you forgot one thing. This is not your house. The moment I finished, my mother-in-law jumped to her feet, trembling with rage. You are insolent. No, I simply no longer endure. She turned to Ethan. And you're standing there doing nothing? Are you going to let her talk to your family like this? Ethan's body tensed. I looked at him, waiting. This time, I would not speak for him. I needed him to answer himself. Ethan opened his mouth and closed it again. After a long while, he said hoarsely, Mom, Claire is not wrong. That sentence fell like a guillotine, cutting through the already tense air. My mother-in-law froze. Rachel's eyes widened. Even I paused for a moment. For 3 years, how many times had I wished he would stand on the side of truth, even once? And now, when everything was already broken, he finally said it. It was not too late for him, but it was too late for me. What did you say? My mother-in-law asked, turning sharply toward him. Ethan looked at his mother, then at the papers on the table, and finally at the messy room. Perhaps he, too, was reviewing the last 3 years with new eyes. I said we went too far with Claire. She has endured too much these years. My mother-in-law let out a laugh, but it sounded hollow and shrill. Endured? Endured what? She's your wife. That's what she was supposed to do. Ethan closed his eyes as if that familiar sentence had struck him in the face. I was not surprised. From the beginning, my mother-in-law had never seen me as an independent person. She only saw the role of daughter-in-law, and a daughter-in-law had to work, endure, carry. If it hurt, if it exhausted her, that did not matter. I folded the papers and placed them back into the folder. Now that everything is clear, I am informing you that I did not come back to argue. I came back for my things, my documents, and to settle things once and for all. From today on, if anyone wants to come to this house, it will require my consent, and if anyone finds that unacceptable, it is better that they do not come. Having said that, I turned and went straight to the bedroom. Behind me, I heard my mother-in-law huffing with rage, Rachel murmuring something with contempt, and Ethan calling my name softly, but I did not stop. I opened the bedroom door, and seeing what had once been my most intimate space, I felt a chill. The closet was half open, the cushions were messy, the shawl I had left on a chair was on the floor. I bent down, picked it up, and shook off the dust. In that moment, I understood with total clarity. There are things that, once invaded too many times, even if you recover them, never become the same again. Trust. A marriage. This room. I took out the suitcase and began packing. Every movement was slow, precise, without shaking, without hurry. First, I took necessary clothing, then my laptop, savings booklet, documents, and some jewelry my mother gave me at the wedding. Then my toiletry bag. Seeing it, I remembered the first time my mother-in-law stayed with us. She had opened the drawer of my vanity and shaken her head. Why does a girl need so many things? A married woman no longer needs to make herself pretty for people to look at her. At the time, I had only smiled awkwardly. Now, remembering it, I realized the signs had always been there. It is just that when you still want to save something, you deceive yourself into thinking it is better to let it pass. In the living room, my mother-in-law's voice did not stop. Sometimes loud, sometimes low, sometimes full of reproach, sometimes full of victimhood, but the message was always the same. She felt offended. Her daughter-in-law had dared to answer her. Her authority had been challenged. I no longer listened to the words. I did not want to. I had already listened enough for 3 years. I opened the nightstand drawer and took out a stack of receipts I had kept. Most were for repairs or replacements of things broken after visits from Ethan's relatives. A lamp leg, a rug stained with wine, 3 porcelain plates, even the invoice for cleaning the sofa after a nephew urinated on it. No single expense was enormous by itself, but together they made clear that those visits to have a good time had never been only about affection. They were money, work, time, energy, disorder, and accumulated wear. The bedroom door suddenly opened. It was Ethan. He did not come all the way in. He stayed at the threshold, watching me pack with an expression of total exhaustion. "If you came to convince me to stay, save it," I said without turning. "I wouldn't dare." His voice sounded hoarse. Those 2 words left a bitter taste. I wouldn't dare. Not, I don't want to. Perhaps he finally understood how far I had come. He took 2 steps forward and stopped beside the closet. "Claire." I kept my eyes on the suitcase. "I'm sorry." I folded a sweater, placed it in the suitcase, and then answered, "You've apologized before, but this time is different." I let out a bitter breath. Different how? Different because this time I really saw it. That sentence made my hands stop. I turned to look at him. His face was pale. His eyes no longer showed the wounded ego or anger from the day I left, nor the usual conciliatory tone. What was in his gaze now was real desolation. Perhaps because for the first time, he had been left alone in the middle of the chaos he had always taken for granted as my responsibility. He looked around and said quietly, "I didn't know you had endured so much." I stared at him and asked, "Or did you know, but it was more convenient not to care?" His face stiffened. He did not answer immediately. His silence was no longer avoidance, but like that of someone who had been cornered. Finally, he sat on the edge of the bed with his hands linked together. Probably both. That answer hurt more than his shouting, his reproaches, or his accusations that I was exaggerating, because at least for once, he had stopped lying. I breathed deeply. "Do you know what is most terrifying? It's not that your mother is difficult or that your sisters are inconsiderate. It's that you saw everything and still chose to let me bear it." He lowered his head. "You used my kindness to save your image," I continued, each word slow and heavy. "You used my energy to keep peace in your family. You used my patience to be a good son, a good brother, and a good nephew. The only role you failed to fulfill was that of husband." Ethan squeezed his hands so hard his knuckles turned white. A moment later he looked up. "I know it's late to say anything now." "Yes," I answered immediately. "It's late." Outside, my mother-in-law's voice sounded louder. "Ethan, are you still in there? Tell her to come out and talk properly." We both fell silent. The contrast seemed ironic. Even now, she still thought everything could be fixed by dragging me into the living room to distribute blame and force me to give in. But no. I was not going to walk out like an accused person. I zipped the suitcase closed. The sound was final. Ethan followed the movement with his eyes, his voice breaking. "Do you really want to take it this far?" I placed my hand on the handle. Nobody wants their marriage to end like this. But I cannot keep living as before just to maintain the title of wife. He stood abruptly. "I'll change." I looked at him. This time I felt no doubt. Maybe because his promise came too late, or maybe because I had already changed too much. From the girl who thought everything could be fixed with a little more effort, into the woman who understood that if only one person rose, a marriage is only an empty shell. "You can change," I answered calmly, "but your change is no longer the condition for my return." He looked at me, stunned. It was probably the sentence he least expected. Before, everything between us revolved around one axis. He promised. I softened. I endured one more time. Not this time. I dragged the suitcase toward the door. As I passed him, I stopped for a second. There are things that break and can be repaired, but there are others that, when cracked too much, even if glued back together, never become whole again. Then I walked out. In the living room, immediate silence fell, every gaze fixed on me. My mother-in-law sat on the sofa with her back straight and her face tense. Rachel stood with crossed arms. Emily held her child. I looked at my house one last time and said clearly, without raising my voice, but firmly enough for everyone to hear, "Today I am taking my things. From now on, I will not return unless strictly necessary. What happens between Ethan and me, we will resolve ourselves. But let me say one thing. I owe no apology to anyone in this house. The living room fell into a deadly silence after my words. Nobody answered immediately. Perhaps they did not expect me to be so direct, or perhaps for the first time they realized that the woman who had always been silent in the kitchen, cleaning behind them, enduring their criticism and orders, had never been as weak as they thought. My mother-in-law was the first to break the silence. She leaned on the table and stood abruptly. You speak so well. You owe no apology. You embarrassed this family. You made people laugh at my son. You left your in-laws without dinner, and now you speak as if you are completely right. I looked at her. Before, with only a slight raising of her voice or reproachful looks from the others, I would already have felt guilty. But today, in the middle of that messy room, I felt strangely calm. I did not embarrass you. I simply stopped carrying everything for you. She pointed at me, lips trembling. And you still answer back? I'm not answering back. I'm saying what I should have said long ago, from the first day you touched my personal belongings. From the first time your relatives came and took everything for granted. From the first time I had to clean alone until dawn while everyone laughed in the living room. I should have said it long ago. Rachel, arms crossed, said coldly, Well, you've said it. Do you feel like you won? I turned to her and slowly shook my head. This is not about winning or losing. If I had won, I would not have lost 3 years, a marriage, and so much trust just to get here. The moment I finished speaking, Ethan took one step forward. He placed himself between his family and me. For the first time in all these years, he did not stand in the middle to mediate. He stood, but not to stop me, to stop them. Mom, his voice was hoarse but clear. Enough. My mother-in-law froze. Perhaps she could not believe her own son had said that to her. Ethan turned to his sister and then looked at everyone present. If we have reached this point, it is my fault. I let Claire endure too much. I apologize to everyone for the dinner disaster, but I cannot keep forcing her to come back as if nothing happened. The room sank into heavy silence. I looked at Ethan's back, but my heart no longer felt the emotion I once thought I would feel if he ever stood by me, not because his words were insincere, but because I had waited too long. If he had said that in the first year when his mother touched my things, if he had said it during any of those nights I cleaned until dawn, if he had said it before the dinner for 16 people, perhaps today everything would be different. But now it was like rain arriving after the earth had already cracked completely. My mother-in-law collapsed onto the sofa, pale. Rachel wanted to say something, but looked at Ethan and fell silent. Emily lowered her head, holding her child tighter. I did not want to stay even one more minute. I dragged the suitcase toward the door. Ethan turned to look at me. His gaze was strange. There was no anger, no wounded ego, only deep desolation. Claire, he said. I stopped. I don't dare ask you to come back now. I don't dare promise anything else either. But if one day you want to talk, I'll wait. I looked at him and nodded slightly. It was not forgiveness or hope. It was only a nod for the road we had traveled, for what we once had, and for the final courtesy 2 people who had been husband and wife could offer each other. I opened the door and left. The building hallway was lit, quiet, and cool. The elevator mirror reflected my pale but calm face. When the doors closed, I knew I had not only left an apartment, I had left the role of understanding wife that I had been forced to perform for years. My father was still waiting downstairs. Seeing me come out with the suitcase, he asked nothing. He got out of the car, opened the trunk, and helped me. I sat in the passenger seat and buckled my seatbelt. The car slowly left the garage. Through the window, the city still buzzed. The streetlights formed endless rows of light. I rested my head against the seat and closed my eyes. This time, I no longer felt rage, only an emptiness that hurt, but that was clean. Clean like a table after an old layer of dust has been wiped away. Clean like a kitchen after the fire has been turned off. Clean like a person who finally dares to admit she cannot keep living in a place where people only know how to receive, but not how to love. A few days later, I asked a lawyer to contact Ethan to discuss the property matters and the necessary procedures. We did not create a scandal. We did not destroy each other with cruel words. We simply sat down to examine what our marriage had become. I do not know whether the final result between Ethan and me will be called separation, divorce, or some form of adult ending. But I do know one thing. From the day I walked away from that dinner, I saved myself. I saved my voice, which had been silenced. I saved my self-worth, which had been eroded. I saved my right to be tired, to say no, to live with dignity in my own space. When I remember this chapter in the future, perhaps I will still feel pain, nostalgia, and wonder why I endured for so long. But I will never regret leaving that day, because there are doors you do not discover lead to open sky until you finally dare to walk through them.